Right, today on Listen Up, happy to be joined by Graeme Park. Graeme, obviously a very famous person in the music scene. Graeme, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm not bad.
It's been a difficult time, I suppose, for sort of people in your industry. Could you just sort of explain to people who perhaps don't know who you are, just a bit about yourself?
Well, I'm mainly known as being a DJ, but I'm also a musician. I'm also a senior lecturer, something I do on the side. And I've been a DJ since 1984, but before I was a DJ, I used to play in bands. Of course, ironically, I'm playing in a band again, but it's a very big band, Hacienda Classical Orchestra. Um, and yeah, basically, I spent my life in the music business, but about 12 years ago, started teaching people about how to make a career in the music industry as well. And as I am always reminding people, I'm proud Scotsman as well, from Aberdeen.
Yes.
So if you want to talk about football, be ready for me to shout "Stand free."
Oh well, that's fine. We've just before this went up, actually, we uploaded one with Davy Robertson.
Oh, really?
So it'll be a good chance to plug that and watch another young Aberdeen lad who's done very.
What about you two? I mean, dare I ask, who do you support?
Well, I'll give you a funny story. I played pro youth for Aberdeen once upon a.
Oh my God! Excellent. I'm
maybe,
impressed.
Maybe I was like 10 or something, and I played in goals.
Okay.
Playing for Scotland Boys Club, but at the time they had like the partnership was with Aberdeen, so it was weird. If you did well for Scotland, you went and played for the Aberdeen Pro Youth. So for 6 months to a year, probably, I went and played on the Saturday for Scotland, then on the Sunday played for Aberdeen.
And anyone that you play with got on to greater things?
Not that I can remember with Aberdeen. Well, I can remember playing against Karamoko Dembele. Now I've told you this story before. Oh, honestly, the wee guy for Celtic, he came off the bench, right, and I'm 2001, so he's a couple years younger than me. So I think
Right.
11, he came off the bench when he was about 9. The game was, we were getting drubbed, something awful, and he came off and scored 4 goals and 2 assists from the bench.
All right.
So
what about you, James? Any football history?
Not particularly. I'm a Rangers fan. I've got family that played and what have you, but no, I'm
going to talk a bit about your career in music as well. Just sort of starting from the very beginning. Where did all this start? All this interest in wanting to be a DJ, house music?
Well, I mean, I've said this many times. I never ever wanted to be a DJ. I left Scotland when I was about 17, moved to England with my family, the East Midlands, and I played in bands. I play saxophone, and I used to sing in bands and do sax, a bit of keyboards, sometimes a bit of guitar. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a pop star, right? Especially when I was 19, I bought Wham Rap by Wham. This is way before your time, right? And I found out that George Michael was exactly the same age as me, born within 4 weeks. And I was like, well, that's what I want to do. And it is what I wanted to do. So I played in bands. I also had a job in a record shop. There's a record shop in Nottingham called Selectist. And the reason I got that job is because when I was at school in Kirkcaldy, I had a Saturday job in a very famous record shop called Bruce's, and there were Bruce's record shops for anyone over 45 will remember Bruce's record shops. They were in Kirkcaldy, Stirling, Perth, Glasgow, Aberdeen. And there was a great chain of independent record shops, and because I worked there, that got me the job in Selectadisc. So there I was, at the perfect job, in Monday to Friday and at weekends playing in bands. But the owner of the record shop, whose office was on the same floor that I worked on, he bought a nightclub in Nottingham. It was called the Ad Lib Club, and he bought this. It was a reggae club, and he bought it. And he came in the shop one day and said, "I've just bought the Ad Lib Club," and I'm like, "What? That's a reggae club? What have you bought that for?" He goes, "Well, it's not a reggae club anymore. I'm going to rename it the Garage, and we're going to launch it as this cool underground club playing like really cool music." And I said, "And who's going to DJ?" And he said, "Well, you are." I'm like, "Whoa, no. I play in bands and I work in your record shop." He goes, "Yeah, but I think the music you play on this floor I was on the singles and second-hand floor. So obviously I was playing like loads of great new singles when they came in. But also being in charge of the second-hand department meant that I was playing a lot of classic stuff as well, which is pretty much kind of what I do now, mix new stuff and old stuff.
What type of stuff was it then? Back, like, what sort of artists?
Well, this was 1984. So I would play a lot of things like I used to always love playing 12-inch versions, because all my co-workers in the record shop were all goths or proper indie heads, whereas I've always had eclectic tastes. So as I was the manager of that floor, I was in charge of what we played. So it'd be Human League, Cabaret Voltaire, New Order, Blow Monkeys, Talking Heads. But then somebody would come in with some old disco albums or old salsa records, or old punk records. So I'd drop a bit of disco and a bit of soul and a bit of funk from the second-hand stuff. And then, of course, early singles by people like Madonna, like Lucky. So you listen to Lucky Star by Madonna. It's an amazing funk record, really, with her wittering on top of it. But so it was a really eclectic mix. So I totally understand why the owner of the record shop said, "You're going to be the DJ." And the thing is, I was 19. I didn't want to lose my job in the record shop, so I reluctantly agreed. And that opening night, I think it was a Friday night, and the DJ decks were behind the bar on the top floor. So people were coming up going, "Have you got any Talking Heads, and can I have 2 pints of lager, please?" I was like, "No, ask the bar people." But anyway, I really enjoyed it. I absolutely loved it, because all I did was play music that I liked, and that was Motown, old soul and funk, and then ABC 12-inch dub mixes, and Human League and New Order, and then maybe some of them cooler pop stuff like Madonna, and some classic disco, just mixing it up. And people loved it, and I thought, this is great. And of course, at the end of the night, I got £25 in cash, all to myself. And I remember thinking, if this was a gig with one of my bands, or the band I was in, then we'd be lucky to make 25 quid, and then I'd have to split it with the rest of the band and give the drummer's girlfriend something for doing the guest list or doing the door. So I thought, I'll give this DJing, I'll carry on doing it for a bit. But of course, ultimately, it meant I had to choose stay in the band or become a DJ. So I decided to do more DJing. So I was doing 3 nights a week at the Garage Club in Nottingham, and still working in the record shop. And of course, by being the singles buyer, it meant I could get access to all the new stuff. And in 1986, all this obscure new music from Chicago and Detroit started coming in, all the early acid house tunes and all the early Detroit techno tunes. And I just thought they were amazing. Because I was 14 in 1977, I just embraced punk rock. Whereas all my friends at school, they stuck with Genesis, Yes, Deep Purple, but I embraced the Clash, the Sex Pistols, the Damned, and later people like Elvis Costello, which led on to kind of, Eddie and the Hot Rods and Squeeze, and then the American bands like Blondie. And when I heard the early acid house records and the early Detroit techno records, I got exactly the same feeling as I did when I heard punk rock. It was like, this is exciting, it's fresh, it's new. But not everyone at the Garage Club in Nottingham shared my view. The punters, half of them didn't like it, but the half who did like it loved it. And then eventually it took over. And then by 1987, I had to give up working in the record shop because of all this early house music. I found myself DJing Wednesday nights in Sheffield, Thursday nights in Leicester. I then got asked to do Friday nights at the Hacienda in Manchester, Saturday nights at the Garage in Nottingham. And then I found that most Sundays, because these are my 4 residencies, on Sundays I was finding myself doing obscure gigs all around the country. And because people couldn't book me, I ended up DJing Mondays and Tuesdays as well, in places like Blackburn and Birmingham, and sometimes in London. And that's when I thought, yeah, I think I'll do this DJing. Of course, by then my fee was more than £25, I have to say. and it kind of slowly went up and up. And then the Hacienda became summer '88. The Hacienda was like the kind of the catalyst for UK club culture to explode. And 30 odd years later, I'm still doing it. Although obviously not for the past 4 months, but that's how I became Graeme Park, the DJ.
Not too bad. We were speaking to Brian Cannon a few weeks ago. He did like Microdot. He did the sleeves for Oasis and the Verve and things. And he was saying to us like during that period, like obviously you had punk rock in the late '70s, but that period when house music started to come into the scene, especially in Manchester in the late '80s, he just described it as like a good time to be alive.
It was a great time to be alive. It really was, and that's why I really empathise and sympathise and relate to what's happening with young people today. They've got nowhere to go because of lockdown, and although illegal raves aren't really helping with the COVID-19 pandemic, because you don't want a new outbreak, and it breaks all the rules, I can't get too annoyed, because I was part of the illegal rave scene in the late 80s and early 90s, and I would often leave a club at 2 a.m. because clubs closed at 2 a.m. back in the day. They just did. But everyone was kind of desperate to keep on dancing, mainly because they were all kind of, off it. And I often found myself in the back of a car being taken to a field somewhere in the summer or a warehouse somewhere in the winter and carrying on. So I totally understand the amount of illegal raves that are happening at the moment. However, I think we all need to pull together and try and get the government to give clubs and live entertainment some proper guidance and a roadmap as to how we get out of this situation, because shops, public transport, restaurants have all been given clear guidance and clear instructions, but the nighttime economy, with which clubs and festivals and gigs are part of, we're getting nothing. We're just getting vague mentions, and it's just not good enough. And the government could complain all it likes about illegal raves, but without any guidance and without any target as to when we can, open in a safe manner, people are just going to go and rave in a field, aren't they?
Very much so. I mean, it's definitely something just now that clubs and even kind of more general live music venues are a huge part of people's social lives and the economy. But
they are
the falling through the cracks.
Yeah, the nighttime economy is worth something like £110 billion to the UK economy, and obviously nightclubs, festivals, live gigs are all part of that. So that's a lot of VAT that's not being collected. That's a lot of national insurance contributions that aren't being paid, and that's a lot of tax that's not being paid. But if you look at our Tory government, there's an argument to say that they are quite happy to give money to big, massive conglomerates who are based offshore to keep them going. I think it's a bit fishy, but you can't ignore what clubs and dance music do to the British economy. But you're right, it's a social thing. People need online streaming's great, and people can use technology to watch an online stream on one device and have all their friends on Zoom or Skype or whatever on another device and share it that way. But you can't. That's no substitute for physically meeting someone face to face, giving them a hug. It could be a while till we can give people hugs though, and having a drink and catching up face to face. But then meeting new people. I mean, one of the great things about my job for 35 years, every weekend I meet new people. Some of whom go on to become friends. Some who just you become acquaintances, but you keep in touch with them, or people that you only see when you're in that part of the country. And people really miss that. And of course, the knock-on effect of that is mental health issues. If you live on your own and you may have maybe an underlying health issue like diabetes or asthma, so you've got to be extra careful, but you're on your own. That's not going to do your mental health any good. So I just think the government have done a lot to help people. You can't deny that, but it's been quite selective, I think. And I just think a roadmap of some kind so that people can see that there's an end in sight, whether it's the autumn, whether it's Christmas. If it has to be spring next year, fine, that has to be spring next year. But at least have that conversation. And the thing is, people who work in the nighttime economy, in clubs and DJs and musicians, we're all creative people. So by our very nature, if you sit down and throw ideas around, we can be very creative. So I just think the government aren't listening. And I mean, my MP is a Labour MP, and I've been talking to her a lot about this, and I do get the impression the government aren't listening. But then, are you surprised?
I mean, I suppose the argument for the general person who perhaps isn't as knowledgeable in these things is, oh, well, what's the point in having this discussion? You can't socially distance in a club or at a gig. But I'm assuming from your perspective, it's not just as clear cut as that.
It's not. I mean, you could say any one of us could get on an EasyJet flight to Spain tomorrow and be crammed into a long cylindrical tube next to people we've never met before with face masks on, right, for 2, 3, 4 hours. Well, why can't we have some kind of way of having less people than you get on a plane, but socially distanced in a club? I mean, look at the Sub Club in Glasgow, one of the greatest British clubs. It's fantastic. I mean, they've had to launch a crowdfunding campaign just so they can pay the bills and keep going until we come out of this. And the thing about the Sub Club, it only holds about 450, 460 people. Now, if you cut their capacity by 2/3, that's 125 people. They're not going to make money, are they? But again, creative people can sit down and creative people can maybe find a way of making it work. Now, I've got 2 confirmed gigs in August that are going to be outdoor events with limited capacity. Well, already I'm in discussion and I'm thinking about, is there a way of streaming that online? But with live streaming at the start of lockdown, everyone was doing it. I did lots of stuff with United We Stream GM, raised hundreds of thousands of pounds for charity. But personally, the people, me and everyone else involved, we don't make anything. But if you have a small capacity and the venue's going to struggle to make money, why not sell a ticket for a live stream that gives, like with Zoom, you can only join a Zoom call with a code. So why can't you sell a ticket? Not as much as a ticket to be in the club, obviously, but like a small nominal fee to cover costs of setting up the stream and the cameras and the visuals. And then you could have a third capacity there, paying a regular ticket price, but for a smaller nominal fee, like $5 or something, you could watch or listen online, and that could make up the shortfall in the short term. I don't know, I'm just being creative. And if anyone from the government is listening, and when I say the government, I mean the UK government, because obviously in Scotland, I do think the Scottish government have been setting a much better example about how to deal with the pandemic crisis than the UK government. But if anyone from the UK government watches this, why not just sit down with people like me and throw some ideas around?
Yeah, because just to bring it sort of back to football, and well, to my football, Mullow had done similar to that. Obviously, football clubs, especially like yourselves, there's no gate money, especially in Scotland, there's not a lot of TV money. So I think what they did is they sold like a $5. It was like a day of highlights in old games and things like that. So they sold tickets for a $5, and then to raise extra funds, they sold virtual pies for £2, virtual drinks for £2. You'd like to think something like that is achievable, just that you can adapt that depending on what market.
Well, apparently, because Sky Sports have got the exclusive coverage to the SPFL this season, and apparently they've done a deal where season ticket holders can get access to all home games via Sky. So I think there's a small cost involved, but then you get some kind of code, and then every home, if you're a season ticket holder, you can watch every home game, whether or not it's on Sky Sports. on your computer, which I think is fantastic. So yeah, that's a good example. But you mean, like I say, football's back. Okay, there's no crowds, but there's 22 people, and I've been watching some of the Premier League games on telly only because I don't have to pay for them. No, I'm not that bothered about English football. It has to be said. But if they're on Sky One or Amazon, I've had a little look, and they're proper physical, as you'd expect, games, right? So if football is okay, they get tested once a week, but why can't I and people like me be on a stage separate from the audience with our hand sanitizer and maybe a face mask to enter the venue and a face mask to leave the venue? And why can't we have a small crowd that, socially distancing? Of course, alcohol comes into the equation, and that's when social distancing is a bit difficult to police. But again, creative minds can maybe come up with creative solutions.
We're sitting at a position now where pubs are largely back open, so the alcohol thing, I completely get where you're coming from with the alcohol thing, but again, it's one hand saying do this, the other saying do that, and there's...
Have you been to pubs and stuff since they've opened?
No, not yet. I will.
No.
I was in a couple last night as we record this. It's bizarre because the only thing for me that felt different was it's table service. See, apart from that, there's not. It depends where you go. Some places are a bit more protective than others. We've got like the big plastic screens up per table and things like that. But a lot of the places were just as is, really. So.
Yeah, well, I've not been able to go to any restaurants or pubs because my wife's grey roots have been growing through, and she refused to go out until she went to the hairdresser. But she went to the hairdresser yesterday, and her hair looks amazing. So I think this weekend we'll be going out to a pub or a restaurant. I hope so.
Not bad. I'm hoping this is the last podcast where I'll look like the fifth Beatle or something. But
all right, okay.
But anyway,
just shave it off. That's your solution.
No, I can't even. Honestly, I wouldn't be allowed to record again. I'd be like, right, you're stopping these podcasts and things like that. Back. But so I'll bring it back to the earlier days in your career as well. Obviously, spoke about the Hacienda, and I think even people outside of club music and things like that will know what that is. Can you just sort of describe a bit about your experiences there and what the club was?
Well, when I lived in Nottingham and worked at Selectedist Records, I was a big Factory Records fan. In fact, I used to just buy every single Factory Records release. And very occasionally, if a band that I liked was playing at the Hacienda, but not playing in Nottingham, so say, for example, I saw the Cabaret Voltaire were playing in the Hacienda, or Orange Juice, great Scottish band, Orange Juice, or Joseph K or Aztec Camera. I would finish work and I'd get on the train to Manchester, and then I'd go and see those bands at the Hacienda. So I was familiar with the club as a live venue. But club nights there weren't really a thing. Greg Wilson used to do club nights, or he'd play records before the bands came on, and it was never a club in the true sense of the word. I met Mike Pickering, who had a band called Quando Quango, and then later a band called T-Coy, and we met in London at an ID magazine photo shoot. And he was aware of me, I was aware of him. We were both aware of the fact we're doing very similar things, me in a small club in Nottingham, him in a massive club in Manchester. So we thought we should do something together. So I went up to the Hacienda to do a midweek night with him in February '88 called the Northern House Review. And it was great. It was a proper club night. About a few weeks after that, he said, he rang me up and said, I'm going on holiday for 3 weeks. I'd like you to cover the Friday night at the Hacienda. And I went, I'd love to. He goes, but you've got to come up before you do it. I said, why? We did that club night in February. I've been to Hacienda many a time. And he said, no, I know. Trust me, you have to come up. Things are a bit different now. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, it'll become clear when you come up. So I went, okay. So I had to take the night off my gig that I had, get the train up to Manchester, check in a hotel, and then I went down to the club, and immediately, the moment I got out of the taxi, I could tell something was afoot. because the crossroads outside the club, Whitworth Street West, and City Road, was heaving. People getting out taxis and running to the club, and people getting out cars, and people walking up the street it's a bit like a football match, you know, when everyone's going to a football match, and a massive queue snaking around the corner and over the canal bridge. I'm like, what the hell? Get to the front, Graeme Park. Oh yeah, we're expecting you, and you come. And I went in, and it was like steam everywhere. It's like just steamy atmosphere. And obviously Mike was playing the same music as me, but everyone was dressed down. It was all dungarees and bandanas and smiley t-shirts. Whereas last time I'd been up, everyone was kind of a bit more kind of dressed up, just like my crowd was in Nottingham. But as I walked through the club to go up to the DJ box, I noticed everyone had this wild look in their eyes. And the atmosphere was electric. And I go to the DJ box, knock on the door. Mike opens the door, and he's got that same wild look in his eyes. Anyway, 20 minutes later, I realised and found out what that wild look in people's eyes was. I am, of course, referring to MDMA. And I just could not believe what I witnessed. And then I did it for the next 3 weeks on my own, and I'm so glad that he invited me up, because if I'd turned up without witnessing that, I would have I don't know what I would have thought. And then when Mike came back from holiday, I was asked to stay and do Fridays with him, which I did. And then I obviously got to meet Tony Wilson, the late Tony Wilson, who was the guy behind Factory Records. A guy called Rob Gretton, who was New Order's manager. And then, of course, I got to meet New Order, who a band I'd seen live and I was a big fan of. And previously, you know, Joy Division as well. And I became friends with these people. And now, fast forward to the 21st century, I'm part of Hacienda Classical with Peter Hook from New Order. It's bizarre, but it was the most incredible club. And the only reason it closed was because it was run really badly. All you got to do is read Peter Hook's book, How Not to Run a Nightclub. And every page, you're like, I can't believe how badly this club was run. But that's how it was. And ultimately, the money ran out and it closed. But the building may be gone, but the club lives on. We still do Hacienda Club nights. We do Hacienda Classical. And it's great to be part of that. And I suppose I'll always be associated with that brand. And you know what? I'm more than happy to be associated with it.
The Hacienda is always one of these things that, at least certainly people my age, I mean, I'm a bit older than Ben, I'm kind of mid-30s, so it's certainly something that's going to always have this sort of iconic reputation, and not just within dance music, even kind of going into genres like the Britpop bands and
Exactly.
the right across music. But did you have the feeling then that it was going to kind of have its fingers on so many pies so far down the line?
Well, it was always like that though, because when it opened up, it was a live venue, and all the bands I mentioned previously would play there. Madonna's first ever UK appearance was at the Hacienda, and then used to have Greg Wilson used to play a lot of electro and hip hop and soul and funk. So when Acid House came along, it just took off because it was the perfect venue. You didn't have to dress up to get in the Hacienda. In fact, if you did dress up, you used to get turned away. It was all about dressing down and being yourself. So it was a natural place for Acid House. But on those summers of 88 and 89, when Mike and I were DJing, when Mike was DJing, I'd go for a wander around the club because, you know, in those days, there was no bloody smartphones with bloody people taking selfies. And people didn't really care that you were walking around the club. It's not like now. If I'm in a busy club now and I want to go to the toilet, if there's not a backstage toilet, I have to get security to accompany me to the toilet because everyone wants a selfie, everyone wants a hug, which is, I'm not knocking it, it's just the way it is. But back then, people really didn't care. It was probably a bit of a mank thing, actually. Like, okay, you're the DJ, so what? You know. But when you'd walk around the club, you'd see Mick Hucknall there. You'd see the Inspiral Carpets there, Clint Boone. You'd see the Gallagher brothers there. You'd see all of the Happy Mondays there. The Stone Roses. They were just there enjoying the music and enjoying anything else that was to be enjoyed. But then they'd go away, and you can hear that acid house influence, especially in the Happy Mondays, but even in some of the Stone Roses stuff. And don't forget, I mean, even I say Mick Hucknall was there. I mean, Simply Red, take him or leave him. But there's a great club mix of a Simply Red track called Something Got Me Started, remixed by Steve Silk Hurley. Well, that only exists because Mick Hucknall would come to Hacienda and go, I like this. What's this? Oh, Steve Hurley remix. And then Steve Hurley he asked Steve Hurley to remix one of his tracks. So it was a real melting pot for ideas and creativity and different genres kind of meeting. And I think you can hear that in the music. But yeah, the Manchester thing came out of the Hacienda. And you had different nights. You had Hot on a Wednesday, which was like students. You had Fridays was Nude with me and Mike. And then later on, I moved to Saturdays. And then you had the Flesh nights, which was the gay nights. It kind of catered for pretty much every scene or every genre that came along. And it still does. When we do Hacienda Club nights now, it's not just about playing the music we used to play at Hacienda, because, as you say, it's such a well-known brand. There are people who come to Hacienda Club nights who weren't even born when the club closed. So people who were born this century or the end of last century, and they know all about it from their parents. And they've grew up listening to the music that was played because their parents play it. And, you know, I mean, like, people have just embraced it. So the audience for Hacienda Club nights have become younger and younger. And the people who used to go to Hacienda, they don't go out as often. So when I DJ at Hacienda Club night, quite often with Todd Terry or DJ Sneak or Derek Carter or a lot of the Americans, we're all playing a lot of new stuff because it's a young crowd. And as someone who's been DJing all my life, I love the fact I still get to play new music to an appreciative audience. But obviously, you've got to remember there are people at Hacienda Club night who used to go to Hacienda. So I do drop some kind of older tunes. But I spend a lot of time. I mean, come on, there's a lot of DJs of my generation. I'm not going to mention names here, but there's a lot of DJs in my generation who are quite happy just playing the same old classics week in, week out. Well, that's fine. If they're happy doing that and there's an audience for it, fine. But I just can't do that. I became a DJ because it was about discovering new music and sharing that music with like-minded people. So what I like to do is dig deep into my vast, enormous record collection and find those forgotten classics, some of which are so forgotten that people think they're brand new tracks. And then when they get their phone out to get Shazam on there, and they Shazam, look, I see my Aberdeen Football Club screensaver. When they get their phone out to Shazam a track and it doesn't come up, and what the hell? To clamber up to the DJ box. What was that last track you played? Oh, it was an obscure white label from 1992 that never got released. I love playing those tunes, and people, they might not become massive classics, but people still remember them. I go, what's this? I think I've heard this before. So that's what I like to do. So I leave the obvious classics to other DJs, and then I'll dig out the kind of lesser known classics or new versions or re-edits of the old classics, just to keep it. Otherwise, what's the point in doing the same bloody gig every week? You know what I mean? Okay, admittedly, sometimes I'll play to an older crowd. So if the crowd's mainly an older crowd, then yes, I might be a bit more obvious because you've got to play to the people in front of you. But as I say to any up-and-coming DJ who wants advice, it's quite simple. Read the room. Look in front of you. The people in front of you will determine what you play. There's no point, in my opinion, in spending hours planning your set intricately because you don't know what the crowd will be like. Just be prepared for anything. And of course, that's easier these days because a USB drive can have 10,000 tracks on it. So no excuse not to be prepared for everything. Back in the day, my first ever DJ trip abroad was to New York in 1989, and whatever I managed to cram into my record box, that was it. That's all I could play in the club. And then same when I went to Australia in 1989 for 4 weeks, the records you took with you, that's all you had. So the skill of choosing your DJ set, I think, when you were limited to what you could take with you, was a great skill that you can't teach anyone. You have to learn. And people like me, because we've got that skill that we've learned, it means that with your laptop or your USB drive or your hard drive, as long as you're organised, you really have no excuse not to be prepared for anything.
Mm-hmm. Just when you were talking about like live gigs and sort of the crowd and stuff, I've noticed that because I go to a fair few, but it's not like I'm not like going to Drake or things like that. The gigs I'll go to is like Madness. I'll go in largely younger crowd, Gallagher brothers, Johnny Marr, people like that. That's the sort of music out, and it is majoritively a younger crowd these days. Obviously, you still get people from that were alive back in the day, people that came out.
I think that's because the people you mention come from an era when record companies would only invest in bands if they thought those bands would make them lots of money. And back in the day, if you wanted to make it as a band or a pop star, you had to do your sorry, I'm distracted by my son's FIFA. He's very good. You had to spend the hours rehearsing, writing, practicing, and going on the gig circuit and becoming well known, and physically sell albums. Now, the only way you could become famous was if you were actually good, and if a record company would invest in you. And so all these people you mentioned are heritage acts. Now, technology has made it much easier to make music. It's democratized the whole process, which is good. But it also means, I think, there's a lot more average music out there. And so unless a band have got a really good way of promoting themselves on social media and getting to the right people, the bands you mentioned, they've done all that hard work the old-fashioned way, face-to-face, pounding the streets, doing the rubbish gigs, doing the gigs to nobody, and then building up to play it in big stadiums. And the reason that it's still here today is because of their back catalogue. Madness, an incredible back catalogue.
Have you seen them live, James?
No, I've never actually seen Madness live.
Oh, man.
They're amazing. But I mean, you look at like bands like the Human League, or you say Johnny Marr. I mean, I know Johnny, and I think Johnny's great because he does great new material, but he won't have a problem with doing a few Smith songs in there as well, and the crowd just love it. And look at Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds. His new material is amazing, I think, but then he'll drop a few Oasis songs in the set just to piss his brother off when he sings them. It's great.
This is a debate Ben and I have had for a long, long time. I'm much prefer the High Flying Bird stuff. I think the High Flying Bird stuff's just incredible because it
is. But you see, Noel used to come to the Hacienda, right? And when he asked me and Mike Pickering if we'd remix Beautiful Day from his last album, and the brief was just do a mix, make it the kind of thing you would play at Hacienda back in the day. And Mike and I were like, yes. And that's because Noel completely gets it. And I mean, it's not about being into one genre, I don't think. You've got to embrace all musical genres. And I realised this at a very young age because at 14, 1977, I totally embraced punk rock. But in 1977, I heard Donna Summer's I Feel Love on the radio. And I swear to God, it blew my mind. It sounded like the future. And it still does in many respects. And I realised it's okay to like The Damned and The Clash and electronic disco. And then as punk rock developed and kind of became new wave, bands like Blondie, I mean, their first album is a kind of poppy punk album. But then obviously, Debbie Harry posters all over my bedroom wall at the age of 14, right? And it's just incredible. But then Blondie ended up doing disco, you know, Rapture, Heart of Glass, and then Talking Heads, Talking Heads, who ended up doing like funk music and working with Brian Eno, who was from Roxy Music. And so as I got older, all these like pieces I started to join together, you know, and then house music came along, and house music, or dance music in general, is not afraid to borrow from other styles. And of course, the sampler, which is like one of the foundations of house music, the Akai S900, very cheap sampler, but with hardly any memory on it. You could sample other things, and sampling became the basis of hip hop and dance music and house music, and it just mixes everything up. And I think people really should be less narrow-minded about music and just embrace everything. At the end of the day, if you don't like it, you don't like it. But I think it's important to make those connections, and that's something that I always try and pass on to my students in my senior lecturer's role, where I teach people who want to be live engineers, or producers, or work in radio or television, or just make music, is collaborate and be open-minded, and then the world's your oyster. And things is, try things out. If they don't work, at least you tried, you know.
Just be speaking about the diversity of kind of the sort of music that you listen to, and the eclectiveness. I know one of the bands that I've read that you're quite a big fan of, a group, should I say, was Girls Aloud. You haven't gone from the Clash and the Girls Aloud.
Yeah, but listen to the Sound of the Underground by Girls Aloud. That, to me, when I heard that, sounded like a kind of poppy punk record from 1979. And then there's a few of their, I wouldn't say I was a fan, I don't own any of their albums, but I've got quite a few of their singles. And when you're driving along in the car and a bit of Girls Aloud blasts out, you can't stop, you can't help but sing along with them. And I think they're great. But then I've always loved girl bands, like the Supremes. When I was a kid, my mum used to play a lot of Motown. Well, Diana Ross and the Supremes, but originally they were just the Supremes. They're a great band. And then there's a disco band called First Choice with a woman called Rochelle Fleming, who's the lead singer, much sampled singer. They were great. And then early house music, there were three women called Jamanda. They were fantastic. I just love girl bands. The Go-Go's, which were like an American kind of female punk band. But yeah, Girls Aloud are very, very underrated. Better than Spice Girls, anyway, by a long way.
Absolutely. I quite like them. They've got some really, really, like, I'm a sucker for a really well-crafted pop song. I put together a really good. And
Scotland is great at producing great pop songs. I've got one word to say, and that is Texas. Mm-hmm. Listen to Inner Smile by Texas. It has to be one of the greatest pop songs ever, and it's Scottish. Listen to Edwyn Collins' A Girl Like You, amazing, and Scottish. Listen to the first Orange Juice album, or listen to Aztec Camera. They're just great crafted pop songs. The Associates from Dundee. Party Fears 2, one of the greatest songs ever. So you're right, you cannot beat a well-crafted pop song. Unfortunately, though, these days there's lots of music by numbers pop songs that don't have that kind of rawness. And then going back to technology makes it easier to put things together, off-the-shelf samples, off-the-shelf loops. But back in the day, you'd have to create all that yourself. So when everyone's finished this, go and listen to Party Fears 2 by the Associates and marvel at its wonder, and marvel at the late Billy Mackenzie's vocal. Superb.
It's a lot of guitar bands now in Scotland. I seem to think like the Snuts and the Dunce, bands like that. That seems to be the thing in Scotland just now for me anyway, that I see a lot of. Perhaps that's just because of the music I'm into, but that seems. said?
I think there's two ways of approaching a music career. Whether you're a live band, whether you're a DJ, or whether you're a studio-based producer, there's two ways of doing it. And the first way is try and do something that's popular that everyone else is doing, or forget that and try and do something that no one else is doing, or do something that you're truly passionate about. And if that seems like it's a bit odd, just keep doing it. You'll find out soon enough if people like it or not. If people like it, happy days. If they don't like it, at least you're happy messing about. And don't set out on a music business career to be famous. Set out to enjoy yourself. And if you find fame and fortune while you're enjoying yourself, that's a bonus. Like I said, I never ever sat down and had sleepless nights, desperate to be a DJ. It just happened. But when I realized that I was good at it and I enjoyed it, I embraced it. And obviously, I made sure that I could keep on doing that. But honestly, the past 35 years, if you'd said to me when I was 20, you'll be doing this for the rest of your life, you'll be doing this in your 50s, you'll be doing this well into the next century, I honestly would have said, don't be so stupid. But I am, and I want to make sure I keep on doing it. So I'm 57 in 12 days. I see no reason why I've not got a good few years left in me yet, Let's hope so.
Brilliant. I've got a couple more questions before I let you go. Obviously, I think at least in my view, from an outside looking in, for a musician DJ to sort of play at Glastonbury is the big one, and you obviously got to play on the biggest stage of all at Glastonbury, the Pyramid stage. What was that like? That must have been some buzz, especially for somebody that came into this not really wanting to be a DJ or that.
Well, listen, I've DJed at Glastonbury a few times, usually in the unfair ground, which is the bit that opens up when all the stages close, and usually in Bez's Acid House tent, which is exactly how you would imagine it. But when we got asked to play with Hacienda Classical and to open the Pyramid stage on the Friday, and that was 3 years ago now, or was it? Yeah, 3 years ago.
17.
I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I was going to perform on the very stage that I'd seen some of my favourite bands on. Anyway, it was they opened the Pyramid stage at 10 a.m. on the Friday morning. So we had to get there for 7 a.m. to do a silent sound check. They won't let you do a sound check through the speakers because everyone's asleep or they don't want to give anything away. So they do a silent sound check, is where you do your thing, but the front of house engineer is listening to it all in his headphones, right? And so that was odd. That was odd because you're doing the rehearsal, but you can't really hear anything. And then a lot of the backstage people were like, I said, look, how many people are we going to get? And he goes, well, it's always difficult on the opening day of the Pyramid stage. You'll get some, but don't expect loads. Damon Albarn, he only got 4,000 or 5,000 last year. And we were like, okay, fair enough. But still, it's Glastonbury. Anyway, you went to the green room after the sound check and we had some breakfast and relaxed a bit and tried to get in the zone. And then about 9:30, it's like, right, do you want to get the orchestra on stage and get ready? So you go up to the stage and obviously you have a little peek around the side. Anyway, I'm like, oh my God, everywhere you could see people coming towards the stage. And they kept coming and kept coming. So when we came on stage, they were still coming. So 3 or 4 songs in, as far as the eye could see, people everywhere, right? Could not believe this. Massive buzz. Came off the stage and saw this guy after the show, said, oi, excuse me, you said to me, don't expect that many. And he goes, I apologize. I've never in my life seen that many people for the opening of the Pyramid stage. I said, how many people were there? He goes, well, you see the flags that keep going by, those flagpoles? Well, each one of those flags is about 10,000 people. And when I looked around and went, it's got to be over 60,000. He went, yeah, over 60,000 people. And I'm like, what the hell? And he goes, what the hell? I've never seen that before. So that was just the icing on the cake for me. But then I realized that before I became a DJ, I played in bands. And I would have loved to have played in a band at Glastonbury. 35 years later, I'd just left the stage having played in a band at Glastonbury, albeit on a very grand scale, a classical orchestra. And I thought, yeah, I think I'm doing all right, you know. And the thing is, my late grandfather had his own orchestra in the northeast of Scotland in the 40s and 50s, the George Wood Orchestra. And I just thought, oh my God, he'd be so proud of me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it must have been something, especially like obviously you've had a great career, but to have that come a bit later on in your career as well after everything you've done.
Exactly. No, I couldn't believe it. And then, of course, we've taken Hacienda Classical. We've played at the Royal Albert Hall 4 years in a row. We've played at numerous festivals. Castlefield Ball in Manchester, 4 years sellout in a row. This year would have been our 5th sellout in a row, but unfortunately that's had to be put back to next year. And what started off as it's supposed to be a one-off gig in Manchester has gone on 4 years of touring, not just in the UK. We've been to Ireland, we've been to Switzerland, we've been to Dubai, and I just can't wait to pick up where we left off next year and get because this year's show had lots of new songs in it, so that's on the shelf, and we're going to resurrect it for next year. So come and see Hacienda Classical next year, when hopefully we'll be back in Scotland, because we weren't in Scotland last year, and we weren't due to be there this year, but we played at the Hydro a couple of times, and honestly, to play with Hacienda Classical in my home country, that was the biggest buzz of all. Even got my kilt out for that.
Get a wee sheep's hat on.
No.
Not that far.
And James, do you get anything to add?
Just one last one for me would be, if you had any track you could remix for a single B-side, living or dead, anybody's at all, what would it be?
Wow. I do like random questions, but that's pretty random. Any track at all that I could remix? Let's say The Sound of the Underground by Girls Aloud. I'd love to do something with that.
Class.
Especially if the band came to the studio to watch me working as
well. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Also, just before I let you go as well, you spoke a bit about this off camera as well. Let Us Dance, something you're working on just now as well.
Yeah, I'm involved with 3 campaigns. So very briefly, Let Us Dance is a campaign. It's a hashtag Let Us Dance, to just try and bring to everyone's attention the fact that the nightclubs and dance music and festivals are being overlooked and not getting any of the £1.57 billion that the government has given to the arts sector. So have a look online for the Let Us Dance campaign. The other one is Let the Music Play, which is a campaign by the Featured Artists Coalition, which again is just trying to get a roadmap for getting live entertainment back as a viable way of people like me earning some money. And the third one is 2 hashtags, Forgotten Limited and Excluded UK, because a lot of people in my industry, like myself, we have to have small companies to get paid, and because we don't take salaries, we don't get any self-employed income support, and we can't furlough ourselves. So for example, I've had absolutely 0 income from live music since lockdown began, but there are people who are getting paid, who are getting furloughed to not work, and all we're asking for is parity. All we're asking for is to get the same support, and I just think it's not right. So Let the Music Play, Let Us Dance, Forgotten Limited, Excluded UK. That's enough hashtags for one day, I think.
Brilliant. Excellent stuff. Right, James, you get anything to add?
No, that's good for me.
Great stuff. Right, Graeme, really appreciated you coming on.
No, listen, thanks for having me. And to find out what I'm up to, in a blatant plug, this is GraemePark.com.
We're going to link it up.
If you want to buy one of my t-shirts, you can buy them there as well.
We'll link it in the description stuff so people can find it nice and easy.
Thank you.
Subscribe to us on YouTube, Podbean and iTunes. And until next time, take it easy.